Incoming mech analysis request. In this podcast, we're going to take a look at the Mauler. We're going to check the stats. We're going to crunch the numbers. And then we're going to explore, based on what I see, some tactical opportunities on the table. The idea of asking ourselves the question, how would this mech function as part of a lance? Or if it was functioning on its own, how are we going to leverage what it does well? And this is kind of the formula I apply to any mech analysis. And then the aspects of the mech that are not very good, or its deficiencies, how can we plug that gap with total warfare, infantry, vehicles, or other mechs as part of a lance? Or at the very least, how can we keep our opponent or opposing mechs busy so they can't exploit it? So the stats, Mauler, 90 tons. So that puts it up there. Heavy, an assault mech. Battle value, 1460. So right away, you're kind of looking, and just on the tonnage alone and the assault, you're kind of thinking, that seems a little underpowered. That seems a little bit low on there. It has a very unique armament. And this is, of course, the stock. 2 ER large lasers, 2 long-range 15 packs, and 4 autocannon 2s. Double heat sinks and case on there, so at least all that ammo you're carrying, that hot ammo, you don't have to completely worry about it exploding on you from the critical hits. So my first thought in looking at this mech is, if I have any vehicles on the table, or if I have any light to medium air assets, I'm going to be a little bit worried. And the reach of the autocannons, we're going to kind of go, what I see, these 3 layers here, the autocannons, the missiles, and then finally the cycling to the lasers on there. Those autocannons have the ability to reach out and start putting some damage from an extremely long range. It's certainly not going to be crippling damage on there, but with the ability to reach out, that makes some of my vehicles very, very nervous. Now, normally, I believe across tech levels, there's certain units that you can enjoy playing, but for the battle value, the tactical advantages that they give you, the tactical advantages that they open up are massive. I don't want to say auto-include, because we all have our favorite toys, and battle value, there's only so much in a game, and we got to kind of spread it out. But I believe in taking infantry. I believe in taking Karnov transports with infantry on there, and warriors, kind of the really light helicopters, a couple of different variants on there, but essentially AC-2, AC-5, maybe some missiles, some machine guns, things like that. Of course, the Karnov and the infantry is used for spotting or hot dropping insertion, things like that. Putting that aside, I usually use my warriors to attack vehicles from range, because now we're putting the extreme movement of the warrior itself combined with the range of the autocannon means even if I'm playing on the largest traditional wargaming table that's out there, I'm going to at least be putting down some dice. And I have the mobility to attack from the side and really start throwing on some motive hits. Especially important if my opponent is fielding some medium to heavy tanks, which are already kind of slow as they are. If you slow down the vehicles, now that forces your opponent to make a decision. Leave them behind or start to lag behind. Well, the whole idea is vehicles are cheap battle value to cover you. Or slow down the rest of the lance or whatever else is advancing on there. So either way, not the best decision. The challenge with the warrior, and this is where looking at the Mauler with those 4 AC-2s, where I'm like right away, my tactica kind of goes to that, is yes, I'm going to be flying fast. Yes, I might be flying high. But the challenge is when you elevate yourself on a higher level on the gaming table or hex maps. You see this with some mechs. You see this like one of the first times you play Battletech and you think, hey, I'm going to take my rifleman. I'm going to take my longbow and I'm going to put it on that hill because it has a massive field of fire. Well, that's true. You also have everyone has a massive field of fire back to you, and they're going to light you up. They have to, right? They have to. When people aggressively target my long-range support assets or my long-range missile carriers, things like that, yeah, I'm sad face. Yeah, I'm not happy, but they have to do that. We definitely have to do that. Extremely. The Mauler being a mech and having the ability to push out those autocannons means with the armor and the tonnage, it's not that vulnerable to extreme fire on there. So if you can make it into a position where you can start laying down, I mean, certainly have less mobility than a warrior, but if you can start laying it into position on there, I don't have to worry about the return fire. That means I can be a little bit more aggressive. So the first thing I see is pushing out with the autocannons. Second is I have redundancy in here. We talk about this across every wargaming spectrum, but with Battletech, where you are up against 3 modifiers, and we'll have to go into this idea for a moment because it's very, very important. There's this idea for the final end product, you have to, of making contact and blowing you up. I got to go through, I call them dice pools or gates. You'll kind of use your terminology, where first I start off with my pilot skill. And then I add on my modifiers. Did I walk? Did I run? Is something wrong with my sensors? Is there damage into account? Then I add in your modifiers on there. How fast is the target moving? And then finally we stack on any terrain or night fight effects or anything else that might limit beyond that. So really fast, the numbers on the 2d6 start adding up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The way you get around this, and of course, look, you could get lucky, right? That's why you always take those shots. But the way you get lucky or repeat that luck is to build in multiples of the same weapon profile. 1 is none, 2 is 1, 3 is some. The fact that we have 4 autocannon 2s, I mean, if you've ever played a partisan tank's got some good DACA in there. It's got some good stuff. The redundancy of the autocannons similar to the Mauler here. So it's gonna push those out. Maybe I'll hit with all 4. Maybe I'll hit with 3. I'll probably hit with 2. Worst case, I'll hit with 1. And if I hit with 0, at least I get those bad dice rolls out of the way. So it has the ability to, at range, lay down steady fire. Could you hunt some light mechs with that? Yeah, you could. I mean, you might need 10s and 11s to hit, 9, 10s, 11s in that band, or maybe higher, but you have some shots to kind of make that happen. So we're pushing that out. Now we go to the second cycle of the long-range missiles, and I like the 15s. Well, I should say I like them if I'm playing them. I don't necessarily like them if I'm facing them. This goes back to, in my opinion, for long-range missiles, you've got the 5, you've got the 10, you've got the 15, you've got the 20. First I have to hit, and then we see with how many missiles actually connect. If I have a 20-pack and I roll average, you're still going to soak a lot of damage. You're going to take a lot. If I roll legendary, we've got a major problem on there. If I roll awful, okay, fine, you roll awful. It's, Battletech. On average, 15 to 20 packs put out some bite where you don't really want to get hit on there. As soon as we drop down into 10, it depends on the weight class. If I'm ideally packing an LRM 10, it better be on something, or ideally should be on something that I can't replicate. What do I mean by that? A Valkyrie, right? I've got a very fast, light mech, cheap battle value, 10-pack. So it's kind of a weird indirect fire beast. It's a light mech hunter. It has a lot. I love Valkyries. They're not interesting. On side point, Valkyrie is something you kind of take one of. I try to build in mech redundancy. More than that, you're just kind of spreading out the battle value. But that's an example of a 10-pack mounted correctly on there. Someone will crunch the numbers for a 20-pack Valkyrie in there. When we get down to a 5-pack, if we see that on a light mech like a Thorn that I run, or even some of the heavier mechs like a Grasshopper, that's a different thing. So we've got 2 15-packs, good spread. We've got the redundancy on there. We've got the range bracket that if you're in range for the LRM 15s, you're also going to be lighting things up with the autocannons on there. That's a nice little missile boat. That's got some punch. Now we get closer. Okay, they're not PPCs, but that's not the role of this type of mech from what I see. But you've got the 2, again, redundancy, ER, large lasers. And the mech to me kind of is like an evolved awesome mech, just with the locations and the stuff that goes out. So that now adds into the firepower where you will be shooting that off. So now we've got 4 autocannons, 2 missile packs, and the ER large lasers. That's interesting. That's really, really interesting on that. So what that means is, given the tonnage of it, if I compare that to, it's not always fair to compare, say, like something like a blackjack, which replicates that on a smaller scale. We kind of want to go about the same spectrum. If I look at a rifleman, if I look at a Jaeger mech on there, the idea is, the challenge with these mech platforms is, if the opponent closes to you, and I see this with a longbow, right? I see this when I play my longbows. Archer to a lesser extent, because Archer at least has the lasers to pop off, and it's also got the fists to punch with the tonnage on there, although Archer is more of a long-range thing. With these dedicated fire support mechs, if you close to medium or short range, especially if you're a heavy mech, think of something like a Warhammer. The Mauler technically outclasses the Warhammer, but if the Warhammer can get close and now not only hit you with a PPC, but start to bring in those laser banks and the short-range missiles, usually with this type of support mech, that is your weakness on there. But the Mauler kind of, I see, negates that a little bit, because we've got the tonnage, and we have at a base on there, you've got the extended range large lasers on there. That's some decent damage. That's consistent damage. It's almost, just on a side note, when you close to short range, you want consistent damage. So this way, if you get 1 or 2 good turns, you're soaking your opponent, and they're starting to think, I really can't, I don't want to take this more. Inconsistent damage would be like long-range stuff that's spread over clusters on there. What you get with short-range missiles, especially in the higher packs or short-range missile carrier, things like that, those go out. It's not so much the damage, it's more the crit seeking on it. So we also replicate that a little bit with the autocannon 2s. So I see this as a support mech, hands down a support mech. I see it being a little bit more aggressive. I don't want to say operating alone, because you don't want to operate alone, but it's got the tonnage, it's got the ER large lasers. You'd have to think twice. You'd have to really think twice. It could put up enough of a fight if it does get closed on that other assets can go and push in to support it. The challenge, what I would say where you'd have to be careful, for the battle value, for the tonnage, it's hitting up against an assault mech, but compare an extra 10 tons, where we've got an Atlas, or even throw it up against the Stalker. I think Stalker clocks in at a little bit less on there. I have to double check. But with that, it is underutilized in terms of weapons, what it could potentially mount for the tonnage and everything. If you go up against a more multi-role, something like a Stalker, multi-role assault mech, or even a higher-end heavy mech on there, I could see yourself getting into trouble. You could hold your own for a little bit, but that's not where I would want to be. All right, so if I turn that over to my fellow mech warriors, we're in the Tactica briefing room here. What do you see with this mech? What do you see with how it operates? Advantages, disadvantages, and if you were playing it stock, how would you consider its role on the table?